we're going to kick into it, guys. I've got the record button done, so we'll start with introductions. So thank you all for joining. Again, this session is recorded, so also thank you for anyone who's watching a recorded session. My name is Stu Lees. I am the marketing head for Revise. We are a software company based out of the States, but we're a global business. We have with us today Michael Roberts, who is our keynote speaker, who is from SPKAA and Associates. SPKAA and Associates are a gold solution partner of Atlassian. They work with Atlassian customers all over the world to do things like cloud migrations, to do support, to do custom work, to support them through their Atlassian journey. They are very, very well experienced, and we have worked with them with our clients on a couple of occasions. Also with us is Vish Reddy, who is the co-founder and CEO of Revise. Vish and our other co-founder, Sanket, are both from the Jira community. It is the technical love affair of most app startups, where they've worked with the platform for many years. They've found a problem and they decided to work together to build an app with the support of Atlassian Ventures and some investors to help solve some problems in the cloud versions of Jira. From there, we've built a product which has gone to market, become Atlassian has won one of the Atlassian Partner of the Year awards just recently. And we're really, really enjoying being involved and supportive of you guys, of the admin community within the Jira world. So without further ado, we're going to hand the voice box over to Michael, who is going to kick off the presentation. Michael's going to hand over to Vish. Sort of somewhere along the way, we're going to aim for a 45-minute session. If we go a little bit longer, remember the record button is on. So if you have to dive off, we won't be upset if you dive off because you've got a job to do. But remember that you will be emailed a recording link sometime in the next couple of days. And there will be time for Q&A at the end if you want to. But like I said, don't be afraid to drop into chat at any time. Something that you want to learn or something that you have a question about that you're not unsure about. All right, over to you, Michael.
Thanks, Stu. Appreciate it. And I have to, I guess, preface anytime you see me looking around, if you see me looking over here, I'm not looking away from anybody because I'm presenting and I want to have my notes and I want to be able to see things. I actually have everybody's a view on another monitor over here. So just so you know, I'm not looking off into the ether. I actually am trying to look at what's being said in the chat and whatnot. So, but happy to be here today. I like to give a little bit of context of like who I am and a little bit of my background before I go too far into migrating your Jira instance from server to cloud. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina. I work with a company called SPKAA and Associates, and we're based out of the Bay Area in California. We service customers globally. I've been in technology for a long, long time, pretty much since I was still in college back in the 90s. I've learned a lot of things and taken a lot of tests over the years. So it means I have a lot of these different certifications and whatnot. But I like to think of myself as a technical person, and regardless what the certifications say, like I'm always digging into things and probably a lot farther than I should, which is why I have some expertise in what we're going to talk about today. So the first thing I want to highlight, and just at a high level, Experian has a statistic, but there are tons and tons of statistics about projects that are related to migrations or data changes or changing applications. And I think this applies to the Atlassian space too, from my experience. People that are migrating, whether it be server to data center, server to cloud, data center to cloud, whatever the migration is, there are a good amount of failures, and it's unfortunate. And so when I built this presentation today, I was trying to build it from a standpoint of here are the things that will give you the gotchas, if you will. Like here's the the right process, but here's the gotchas, the things that you really need to look for. And obviously, everybody's implementations are a little bit different. There's some customizations that you may need to be mindful of, but at a high level, think of this when you're starting to plan your migration. That proper planning and understanding the technologies are really imperative to being able to successfully migrate to the cloud. So with that, this is kind of our agenda today. I'll give you a little bit of historical context of why Atlassian Cloud is even here, and why it's something we're talking about. And then really the meat of what we're going to talk about is the migration prep, the things that you'll need to look at and consider before you actually do the migration, the actual migration process. And then I'll try to give you some gaps and blind spots, things that you may not find on Atlassian documentation, or things that you need to consider. And then hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A as well. So first, let's talk about like, why are we even here? And if you're a longtime user of Jira, then you probably know some of this stuff and it probably doesn't matter to you. But if you're trying to understand the new project that you just got tasked with in terms of migrating from server to cloud, and you're like, what's Jira? Hopefully this will give you a little bit of context. So Atlassian was founded back in 2002. Two Australians, Mike Cannon-Brooks and Scott Farquhar, founded the company. It was really just like a bug tracker. A couple of years later, they released Confluence as a collaboration product to share content and basically like documentation, right? And then as they evolved as a business and began to take on venture capital and put more money into the product, they really started to understand, and there was a grassroots movement of developers that were utilizing their tools. Some of them were literally installing it on their workstation. So Jira was up as long as Bob's workstation was up. And when Bob shut his workstation down, nobody could work in Jira anymore. So that kind of that workflow evolved into more of an enterprise tool as more companies began to utilize it and use it for tracking purposes. And I think the big thing to note here is the change of model in 2014 for Atlassian, where they basically launched a data center version of their product, which was really made in order to provide a more scalable architecture for the product. But it also changed the licensing model too, from perpetual to subscription. And so anything that was there before that was labeled as a server product, meaning it was meant for a single server. And the data center versions were more focused on, multi-node environments. It was built for scale, for enterprise. And I think that was a big change, not just from the technology perspective, because it did enable, load balancing and all those type of things, but it also kind of set into motion a divergence in their product of this is server, this is data center. And for quite a while, it did have its value of having both of those types of scenarios. But in 2020, they made the announcement that they were going to make server end of support in 2024. So giving customers roughly 4 years or so to figure out how they were going to either migrate to a data center product or to a cloud product. So prior to 2020, you basically had these options. People were hosting their server instance on-prem, their data center instance on-prem, or they were utilizing the Atlassian cloud. And one of the knocks on Atlassian cloud before that point was server and data center had so many more features than cloud. But when they made this announcement, they made it as not just an end of support for server, it was more of a journey to cloud. And it was Atlassian showing, hey, here's the things that we're going to really invest in when it comes to the cloud product. We're going to add more features. We're going to build around the models that we started with standard and premium and enterprise, and they ended up launching enterprise not long after that. And so this journey to cloud has basically been going on since 2020. They actually have this page on their website updated that actually is counting down the days till the end of support for server. And really that means companies needed to figure out where they wanted to go and what that would look like. So today, basically your options for where you're hosting your Jira instance are data center on-prem, meaning in your own data center, not to use the word twice, the data center version in some type of cloud platform like AWS or Azure or GCP, or to actually move to Atlassian Cloud. And I think from the time that the announcement was made until, let's say, the beginning of 2022, Atlassian made a ton of feature investment and launch, not just saying they were going to do it, but actually having it out into the products for Jira Software, JSM, Confluence, and several of the other ones. And by adding those features and making them available in cloud, it's really allowed the product path when people were looking at maybe going to data center before. Now they are absolutely looking at cloud, because cloud is where new products or new features are being released. And this is really the breakdown today for the core products of Jira Software, JSM, and Confluence. When customers are looking to migrate to the cloud, usually in most cases they're looking standard or premium. There are obviously people that are of the large enterprise variety, and there are obviously some considerations when you're moving to these platforms too. And so understanding what plan actually tracks to the feature set that you're using today on either server or data center is really important. So that's kind of the main place to start, is what feature sets do you need, and what does that map to between standard and premium at a minimum. And obviously, free is there, and there's always going to be small free plans. But the big migration concern here is people that have a server instance that at least are going to fit standard, right? They're going to have more than 10 users. So let's jump into some of the prep work that you need to understand too before you're actually doing these migrations. I like to start with just 3 main strategies of how to migrate to the cloud, and trying to give some context around what makes the most sense, what's good, better, best, if you will. And then the other thing too is to understand what's the value in migrating. Is it literally just to pick something up and put it down in another version of the tool or another system, or is it to really gain value out of it? And a lot of times it's the latter. They really want to gain value. So the first strategy is just literally a lift and shift, and is to basically not redesign anything, just take it from A and put it in B. I see this as lower value, but it's viewed as the quickest method, because all you're doing is just taking it from system A and putting it in system B. But the reality is it doesn't really provide value. And when you're thinking of spending money and time on a migration, hopefully there'll be some value out of the new system that you're moving to. And I feel like that's the lift and shift is kind of looked at as just, let's get it done quick, but that may not be the right approach. Another approach is a phased approach, where you're going to segment things by a module, by a size, by a usage, by a team. I still consider this kind of low, although it's phased and staged. But it's still, again, it's easy because it's seen as least disruptive to the entire organization. It's just minimally disruptive. But what I've found is, as let's say 1 team or 2 teams or 3 teams at a time are being moved to the cloud, it ends up creating all this contextual weird scenarios of, well, what team is using what system, and are they going to see it if I submit it here or use this system? So that creates a lot more confusion, and it detracts from the ultimate value, which is getting on the new platform with the best solution possible. And then the third, which I think is probably the higher of the 3, or the highest of the 3, is really determining what you're going to take and what you're going to leave behind. And you're just moving the applications and the data that make the most sense, and potentially even re-architecting things in the new system. So what we find is a lot of the customers that we help with their cloud migrations, they do this partial migration because they're looking at projects and looking at things that they just don't need to move, right? So that removes the size of the scope of the migration, but it also allows them to find value in that. Oh, we don't need to move these old things because nobody uses them anymore, so why clutter things up? I use the analogy of an apartment move or a house move. Nobody just literally picks everything up, including the trash can, and takes it to the new apartment or new house. You kind of go through things, you throw things out you don't need, you sell things you don't need, and you just move the things that you do. So that's kind of the what I consider is the best approach there. The other areas are tools that you need to know that exist. The first is JCMA, the Jira Cloud Migration Assistant. And this is a plugin that you install into your server instance that basically helps you with this migration. JCMA is Atlassian's tool, and it's not made by a third party, so it should be able to migrate most, if not all, of your data. But there are some considerations with JCMA. It is an Atlassian built tool that is being updated on a regular basis. So there are things that it runs into where it errors out and has a problem. Sometimes that's data that you need to fix on your side. Other times it's a problem with JCMA. And so because we're an Atlassian partner, we see those things. You can actually communicate with Atlassian when we see problems with JCMA. And that helps them revamp the tool, make it even better, and re-release it with more updates. As long as your Jira or Confluence instances are up to a certain minimum, and JCMA's documentation talks about what that minimum is, then JCMA can actually help the migration to the cloud. In some instances, you won't be able to use JCMA, and we'll talk a little bit about those instances a little bit later. But there's another tool that we've used that has been very helpful over the last couple of years, which is a tool from AppFire. It was an acquisition called Bortron, I think, called Configuration Manager for Jira. And the really cool part about that specific tool is that it has 3 different ways it does snapshots or configuration snapshots. So the first one is a system configuration, and that contains all the configurations of a Jira instance. So project, workflows, schemes, screens, all that. And then this means you can use that snapshot to transfer all of the Jira configuration settings from one instance to another. Now, that's really more for the on-prem side. So let's say you're moving Jira server to data center. So that would be an instance where this tool would actually come in really handy to do something like that. And then the other 2 options are a project configuration snapshot, which allows you to grab like the settings for just a certain number of projects. And then you can also use the project with issues snapshot, which gets the projects you select and their configurations. And so this is a very useful tool. Again, I'll show you a scenario where this is very valuable for a cloud migration in a bit, but this is another really important tool, I think, if you're considering migrating to the cloud. Okay, so let's talk about, at a high level, the process of migrations. And this is actually a elaborated Atlassian approach with a lot of lessons learned with our team over the course of the last several years, along with some things that we've learned from customers as well. So this 5-step approach is basically how we approach all migrations, and everybody probably should. The first is this assessment phase, and it's basically a lot of data gathering, a lot of auditing, a lot of reviewing, and we'll talk about a couple of the things in the gotchas section that are important here. But first is things like, what's the size and the complexity? How many issues are we talking about? How many users are we talking about? Making sure that we understand that target selection. Where are we going? Is there a sandbox already? Is it a production cloud instance that already has production data? So we have to be mindful of that. And there's unfortunately a lot of user and product discovery where we're having to talk to other stakeholders, people that use the system, finding out what apps are being used, what apps aren't being used, and really understanding the scope and the size of the information that you're looking to migrate. Another thing that's important here too in this assessment phase is to understand, as you move to the cloud, will you be using a single sign-on solution, or will you be using just the local app user accounts? So this is another kind of really important consideration early on. You want to put all that stuff together and make sure that you have it all in one place. The next phase is this planning phase. And what we do here is we kind of figure out, what's the migration strategy? Are we moving? Is it lift and shift? Are we doing partial? Are we doing phased? What does that look like? We figure out what the overall migration plan is, who is involved, what stakeholders, and then start to communicate. And this is where having a migration team with all the right stakeholders involved actually helps a ton. And then we also recommend that there's a lot of instance cleanup, archival projects that don't need to be moved, those type of things. And then the next step is, we call it a sprint phase. And the way that we approach it is 1 sprint per week. And we're basically attempting the migration. We're setting up the single sign-on if that's an option that you go. We're actually doing those test migrations with JCMA and seeing where we get, and trying to identify where are the issues, where are the errors, the parts where JCMA will error out, trying to address those, and then the next week conducting another sprint. And this is another good time as you start to get things migrated into the cloud environment to bring your change control team or potentially other stakeholders or other users into that cloud environment so they can actually do training. Hey, here's what the new platform is going to look like. There are some nuances. It's still Jira, it's still Confluence, but there are some nuances. It looks a little bit different. And then this is where you can start to get feedback from the users before your migration is actually done. So this is a really good like testing phase, user acceptance testing. And once you get to the point in your sprint phase where you can do 2 sprints in a row and you can migrate all the data, then it's time to actually plan your migration date. Sometimes that's a Friday night before a long weekend. Other times it's in the middle of the day, as long as users aren't using the system. Depends on what your requirements are there, but trying to make sure that you understand in that sprint phase, it takes X number of hours to do this migration, and I need to allot that from a production perspective. This is how long it's going to take to get all that stuff into production. And then you'll install the third-party marketplace apps that you need. You'll migrate the app data, which we'll talk more about here in a bit. And then you can actually do production user acceptance testing, make sure that your change team has actually seen things, all the data is there, all the things that they're looking for are there. And then post-launch is basically confirming with the change team that everything is good, that all the right communications have been sent, and potentially even putting your old instance in a read-only state. We recommend that for a little bit of time, so that way people can still access it, but they can't change anything. This is also a good time to document changes, lessons learned, things like that. And that way this will be there stored for archival purposes going forward. So basically,
Michael, I'll just pause you for a second, Michael. Thank you. I'll give you a voice pause, and you can have a deep breath and have a sip of water. But at the same time, a couple of questions that I thought I would take the gap in the session to deal with. First one is from Trudy, who's interested in handling the native functionality that JCMA doesn't automatically handle for migration, i.e. workflow properties. So I'm a marketing guy. I'm a recovering tech guy. So I'm not really sure the context of that one, but please, what's your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, so with JCMA, there are some things that JCMA does very well, and there are some things that JCMA doesn't do very well. And the good news is JCMA is being updated on a regular basis. So something, if you tried a migration, let's say a month or two ago, and it didn't go very well or didn't have certain things, try it again today, because those updates actually we've seen in the past several years have made life so much easier for certain areas. So I know that there was some stuff with workflow properties and whatnot, but it just depends on exactly how custom they are too. So we briefly talked about this in the beginning. I mentioned like customizations, and I would say 80% of companies do not customize their automation workflows, or even hardcore customizations with custom scripts and whatnot. Most companies do not, but the companies that do that, you're exactly right. There's going to be a lot of potentially a lot of manual work. And as you create that JCMA playbook, you'll basically have to get that playbook updated with, okay, I need to do these steps in JCMA, and then I need to go make these steps manually in the cloud instance so that the rest of this works, or the automation works, or whatever. So unfortunately, there are certain things that potentially could be manual, but you'll want to make sure that you create those runbooks for the actual migration timeframe.
Great. And I have one more question. So there's you would have encountered a variety of, we'll call it source environments over the times where you guys have helped people through migrations. Small environments, large enterprise environments. Do you find that you need for the, let's say the large, well, I'll reframe the question. What areas of complexity have a tendency to create more hooks in your migration process, or are they all the same? Do you always need to do, say, like 3 iterations of sprint testing, or are there kind of areas where if your organization is leaning into a certain configuration type, where you're going to have to spend a little bit more time testing and finding how that migration works for you?
Good question. I actually have a couple points in the gap and blind spots section
Mm-hmm.
next that talks about some of the things that can cause you the most time and effort. Surprisingly, migrating projects and issues and those things, you could have 5,000 issues or 100,000 issues. A lot of times that's not the problem. Obviously, it takes longer to do the more issues, but it's all these other things. And it mostly gets hung up. I think the biggest hang up is marketplace apps and your authentication method, user authentication method. Are you doing single sign-on or are you not? And some companies have made the decision in the middle of the migration that they're going to switch from one to the other, and that can cause problems. Those
Ah,
are, to me, the two big areas are the third-party marketplace apps and the complexity around that, and then the user authentication. Those are the two big hangups I see. Besides that, the size of the migration really surprisingly doesn't mean as much. I mean, it means you have to babysit things, but in the grand scheme of things, it's just time. It just runs.
so what you're saying to me is if I even have a really small, what I feel is a simplistic configuration, I've still got to do the same work that,
Right.
um,
Right.
as the enterprise clients, right? I've still got to go through the same amount of testing, planning, rigor, to
Yep.
make sure that I come out the other end with users who are logging in and happy.
Right. Yeah. And those 5 steps that I gave, the sprint phase, I would say in most cases, and we're dealing with customers in the 100 to 1,000 user counts the most in that realm. I would say 6 sprints, 6 to 8 sprints is usually good to create the run book, get everything down, and actually plan the migration. Obviously the bigger the migration and some other things could cause complexity to that, but yeah, that realm is usually the 6 sprints, 8 sprints type realm. Some are quicker, some are 3 sprints and everything went over really well. But the like I said, the areas that I've seen the most hang up that causes the most time, marketplace apps and your IDP if you're going that route.
Great, cool, thank you. And
Cool.
let's I'll let you move on.
Yeah, let's jump into these like gaps and blind spots. And I kind of gave you a little bit of this in that last answer, but this is a big one. Like figuring out if you want local users, if you have local users, or if you want to tie into your IDPs like an Okta or Azure AD or whatever, that allows you to utilize Atlassian Access. And if you have a large number of users and you have a service like this already, like an Okta or an Azure AD or any of those Google single sign-on that type, I think Atlassian Access is a no-brainer, and you're going to want to do that. So that way, you're not having to manage independent users and password changes and whatnot. So this is a big decision. If you are not using SSO in your server instance and you want to use SSO in the cloud, but if you already are using it, it could be less of an issue. So it just depends on where you're at today. That's a big one. Um, Another one is and I learned this one a little bit the hard way through my conversations with Vish at Revise about the shared responsibility model and understanding what you actually are responsible for from a data perspective. So this is another area of like gotcha. Just because it's cloud doesn't mean you don't have to do backups anymore. So like that's a whole concept that some admins need to make sure that they don't miss the boat on. And as somebody that I literally thought, oh yeah, it's in the cloud, it's not a big deal. Well, yeah, what happens if somebody deletes an issue or deletes an attachment? I mean, there are real considerations for that too. So that's another, I would say, blind spot that you need to be aware of. Um, this is another one that's a little bit more convoluted, and this is what I was referring to earlier when there are a use case for that configuration management for Jira add-on that I talked about. So let's say you have to combine 2 server instances into one instance in the cloud. So there's some complexity here around, well, I'd have to use that configuration manager for Jira tool to migrate projects from one server instance into another, essentially combining them or merging them together. And then I'd use JCMA to migrate that to the cloud. So you're using both tools in one kind of instance. And that's a use case for like having to have that other tool. It's built for like, the server or data center instances, but could be very useful in that multi-server to a single cloud instance type. And we do see that a lot with like companies that have done mergers and whatnot and need to migrate to the cloud in one instance. And this is probably the one that you'll spend the most time on is these marketplace app areas. Now, the great part about it is if you have a server app and there is a cloud app for the same company, the same vendor, the same thing, that's great. A lot of cases, they'll actually have a migration utility for the marketplace app, which means JCMA won't migrate it, but that third-party tool, they actually have a tool that will do the migration. So just means in your run book, you'll have to run that separately. But that's, to me, the best case situation. It's great when those happen. There are scenarios that we run across with companies when there is no cloud app. That vendor that made the server app, they have not made a cloud app or are out of business or will never make a cloud app for whatever reason. And that can be time consuming because then you have to spend time finding, even if it's being used, if it is being used, what's the value in it? If it's being used and there's value, finding an alternative, and then trying to figure out how you migrate that data from that app to another app. To me, that you will spend oodles of time in this instance if you have to do that, and that's another thing to be aware of. Make sure you audit all of your apps. And then like the other scenario is, and this is kind of really first before all those two, is are you using these apps even? So the first thing I would do is look at, here's all the apps we have, but when was the last time they were used? And is there data in them? There are times where companies are paying for marketplace apps that they really just aren't even using, or one person is using. So that may be another situation where one person is using it. Maybe it's not that great to use. I do have to put a little anecdote here that I'm going to give a shameless plug to all of the solution partners out and doing these types of migrations, because there are some benefits to utilizing solution partners to do this type of stuff. From an efficiency perspective, do you want to learn how to do all this? You probably have a day job in most instances. I would say a lot of the companies that I work with, the Jira Admin does not have the title of Jira Admin. They are the director of something or the manager of this or the whatever. And so if you are a Jira Admin, then yeah, you have all day to do this type of stuff. But if you're not, like, that may not be the most efficient use of your time. Usually, we also find that we can do these migrations a lot quicker because we've seen these problems before with JCMA or with a customer's data. So we know when it's a problem with the data versus a problem with JCMA. So we need to tell Atlassian. And then the other thing, it's really holistic. Because we do a lot of these, there's a lot of potential for downfalls and miscommunication or lack of communication. So we kind of built that into all the stuff that we do. So it's not just a quote unquote technical migration, but it's change management. It's, making systems better. It's understanding the business outcomes. So yeah, again, just a shameless plug. That's the reasons why companies utilize solution partners for those type of migrations.
Michael,
and I wanted
I'll reinforce your shameless plug with a third-party, unbiased plug that I've been in the IT industry for many, many, many years, and I've always had a philosophy that there's no investment personally in your own personal technology stack if for a project you'll only ever have to do once in your life. Right, that's why partners exist. You do that multiple times. If you're an admin out there thinking, gosh, there's a lot for me to learn, really ask yourself the question, is that something that I'm ever going to, are these skills going to really help me do a great job in my future? The answer's probably got question marks around it. And in that situation, it's probably a good idea to, if you're not working with a partner, reach out to someone like Michael, who has done it many times before, and who can carry you through the process. Give them give your bosses the recording of the session and scare the heck out of them so that they see and feel and understand the risk in order to get budget to get a professional involved. That's kind of my advice, and Michael's not paying me for
it. That's right. That's absolutely right. The other thing we end up talking a lot about with people once they're migrated to the cloud, they kind of go, all right, well, now what? What's the next things that we need to look at now that we're on this platform? And it's different for everybody. And this blog post that's on our site talks about a lot of the different things. But I wanted to add just a couple, I think, quick, like potentially really cool apps that if you're not utilizing these in the cloud, especially highlighting the fact that they have cloud migration assistance on these apps and that they are cloud fortified. Obviously, Revise is to me a no-brainer. And from a charting perspective, the folks at Old Street Solutions were actually acquired recently by Tempo. So if you're a fan or familiar with Tempo timesheets, they are now the same company that owns the custom charts for Jira reports. Those are some really powerful tools, along with Zephyr if you're doing testing for the software that you're utilizing and want to integrate that all into Jira too. I think the big thing again here to highlight is cloud fortified, which means they have some rigorous security protocols around them and response time and all the safeguards and whatnot. So all those tools add a layer of security and control that you may not have had in that server environment. Again, keep in mind the whole shared responsibility model, and you need to be responsible for your data. But these are kind of the next steps in terms of apps and things that I would consider. I know, Vish, you wanted to talk through, and I wanted to make this more of a conversation for the next couple slides, if that's all right. If you wanted to talk through some of these.
Yeah. Actually, maybe I see a question from Jyoti on cloud to cloud migration. Maybe I'll address that as we talk through this slide. So, first of all, Michael, thank you for a lot of new learnings for me too in terms of migration. Thank you for sharing your experiences out there. The revised data manager is actually could be used as part of your migration too, but not from moving data from cloud to from server to cloud or data center to cloud, but rather from once you are in the cloud, moving things from your sandbox to production. So that's where our app can play a role. Besides protecting your data, of course, we help you back up and restore. So if you think about it, right, once you move some of your configuration into your sandbox as part of your test run, as Michael was talking about, you could take a backup of that after you've done all your configuration as how you would like it to be. You could take a backup of that, and then you could restore it back in your production or your new site, so to speak.
And Vish, if I can just interrupt, this is a really important feature for Revise too, because Atlassian has no feature to, if you do a bunch of stuff in your sandbox or configuration, you have to do that all over again in production. So this is a great feature to just be able to back up and restore that in your production instance too.
Yeah, we saw that when we initially started off, Michael, as you know, we started off with backup and restore. And then as we started talking to more prospects and folks like yourself, we realized that moving data across cloud sites is something critical. And so maybe, Jyoti, to your question, we can help you migrate your configuration. Today, our app supports moving configuration from one cloud site to another cloud site. Configuration out here being your workflows, screens, custom fields, and so on. And we're going to be adding in the upcoming weeks to even move issues from one cloud site to another cloud site, including attachments and all the data which goes along with it. All right, coming back to the four things which the revised data manager does. We talked about the first one, moving data from cloud to between cloud sites, backing up and restoring. We also support JSM assets. This tool is really built for admins. Our focus, our target user is the admin. And so providing analytics which are useful for the administrator. And then lastly, over the course of time, there's a lot of configuration which is done, which is not used. Even during migration, there's a lot of configuration objects which are put into the production site, which you may want to get rid of. One of the things which from a shared responsibility perspective, it is the responsibility of the admin and Atlassian for the optimized performance of your site. It's not only Atlassian's responsibility. If you misconfigure something, it could slow down your site. So this is where going and getting rid of unnecessary objects, we help you do that easily. Maybe if you could go to the next slide. If you had next slide, Michael, on your, there you go. Thank you. So this is, an example of once you are moving data into your sandbox environment or your UAT site, you make all your changes in terms of configuration. Once you're happy with it, you could take a backup of your UAT site, just the configuration part, and then you could then restore that configuration into your production site. And then, of course, what we would recommend, again, from what we have seen customers do, is they don't restore back the data from the test site or the sandbox. That's because there's a timing difference. Your server is still being used while all this migration testing is going on. So you want to get the latest version of your data directly from the server. At least that's how we have seen a lot of some of our customers try this out. Again, just illustrating what you could do with the data manager, besides just backup and restore. If you go to the next slide. And then, of course, the previous slide was talking about what you could be doing during migration. This is post-migration. Obviously, you want to protect your data, your shared responsibilities. Mistakes do happen. After all, we are all human. Things sometimes get accidentally deleted. And if you want to recover that back in a granular manner, let's say somebody deleted accidentally an issue or an attachment, or maybe something on the configuration side too. Somebody messed up with the configuration. How do you recover that back in a granular manner? That's where backup and restore comes in. Now, one of the things which Michael, you mentioned earlier, if you make changes, typically, if you are at the premium or higher tiers of Atlassian Jira, then you get a sandbox, and typically you go, once you're in the cloud, you go make all your changes in your sandbox, you try it out, you get approval from all your stakeholders, and then you go to sort of redo that work again. Meaning, let's say you created a workflow, everybody likes it, you've tested it out, it's great. You spend a couple of hours or days, depending on how complex that workflow is. You got to spend probably the same amount of time again recreating it. So this is where, again, backing up from your sandbox, that specific workflow, and then copying it over to your production. That's where we make it easy. Of course, I think going back to Jyoti's question earlier, can we use this to go to multiple different sites? Yes, you can pair the Revise app with multiple different sites. It's not just limited to only sandbox and your production site. It could go across to other sites too. And so, it's more about saving time. You don't have to keep redoing the same thing. And also, this helps you keep audit logs of what moved, who moved it, and it's a much more secure way of doing things.
And Vish knows some of the folks at our company. We're very heavy in highly regulated industries, so when we understood that there's audit logs of all this stuff, like that was checking lots of boxes for us, because a lot of our customers have compliance needs. So yeah, another big benefit for utilizing the tool.
Again, just going back to the question that Jyoti has, which is, any cloud site, you can pair them up. We allow you to secure securely pair up cloud sites. the only requirement is you got to have the revise app on both ends, so that we can validate the credentials before moving things. And then the last one, post migration, which I want to touch upon, is going and helping you optimize your cloud site. You may have a lot of custom fields and workflows which you may have put in, which may not be being used, and we help you identify them easily and delete them. Of course, even if you delete them, there's a copy of that workflow sitting in the backup if you ever need to get it back in,
because some people make mistakes.
Yep. So those are the 3 use cases I could think in the context of migration of your data. During migration, how we could be helpful. Post migration, how we could be helpful.
Cool. Thanks, Vish. Just real quick, I already belabored the point about utilizing Atlassian solution partners. So we are one, and we're a woman-owned business, been in business for over 20 years, and definitely have experience with lots of migrations. I know there was the question about a cloud-to-cloud migration. We actually finished one of those last week. So yeah, lots of cloud and general migration experience. On our website too, we have a migration case study for Code Corporation that talks about what was involved in the migration for them from server to cloud, and they're actually flourishing. And there's a quote from Ryan Hubler, their VP of engineering that I worked with, about what they were happy with, not just working with us, but also like getting the benefit out of some of the stuff in cloud that they weren't getting when it was on-prem, and some of the new features that they're able to utilize that they weren't able to do that before. So I'll leave that, and I'll also leave up our contact info slide, and you can connect with Vish or I on LinkedIn, and I'll open it up to see if we have any more questions. I think we got a little bit of time.
Great, thanks, Michael. And look, don't be shy in chat if you do have any question that you want to drop in. I've got one from LinkedIn from someone who couldn't attend the session. So for Michael, what or which cloud plans are most like the Jira service plans?
So it depends. If you had advanced roadmaps, which used to be Portfolio for Jira, which is a separate plugin. Advanced roadmaps comes with premium. If you are not using advanced roadmaps and you have server, probably standard will be okay. There are lots of differences between standard and premium, but what I find is if you're talking about Jira software, that's the main driver if you have or use advanced roadmaps. On the JSM side, the big kind of differentiator between standard and premium appears to be Insight Asset Management, which was an acquisition that Atlassian had from a couple of years ago. And if you are using Insights for asset management, then you're going to need to go premium. If not, then standard may be okay. Again, there are a lot of different features between the two, but I find that those are the main 2 drivers. On the Confluence side, it's usually there's an analytics portion to premium, which you can see what users actually viewed a page, which is very beneficial if you want to make sure that people are looking at documentation or looking at things that are being posted. But those are like the 3 main drivers for each of the cloud plans, I think.
Great, thank you. And I've got a question which is potentially a hairy one, because of course it's going to be highly variable, but you talk about all of these different sprints, and I know you have to go through the sprint to really understand the magnitude of what this is going to do time-wise, but right. Give us some examples of how long has that final cutover from your local to cloud sprint, the data transfer. What are we in store for in the future? Are we talking a day's downtime, 48 hours downtime? What sort of experiences have you seen out in the wild?
So those run books, those playbooks that we end up creating can take anywhere from, and this is, a combination of actually hands-on keyboard, clicking things, doing things, plus letting JCMA or another tool run to migrate data. Anywhere from 3 hours to like 20 plus hours. So there are lots of different scenarios for the time it may take. But again, most of the time in those sprints, you're really trying to get that type of stuff figured out. You're trying to figure out how long does this piece take? And let me try it again to get to the next piece. And you're just putting all that stuff together so you can get a view of what that looks like. And then you can figure out, oh, is that a middle of the day thing? Or is that a long weekend with a holiday thing? You kind of figure that out once you put all those components together from that playbook.
Great, thank you. All right, so last call for any questions from our audience. I haven't seen anything pop up. Vish, while I'm looking for questions, you got any final comments or questions yourself?
Just a thought. I didn't. I think interesting insight into how customers choose different tiers of the product. I wouldn't have thought the Confluence feature where knowing the analytics of who's using what page would be that useful. That you're going to be jumping up a whole tier. That was a very interesting insight, Michael. Thank you for sharing.
And what I'll say is thank you, Michael. As the guy on the sidelines just watching, I really appreciate the insight that you brought to the session. It's clear that you guys have done this a ton of times. And, I'd really reinforce that people reach out to you, even if it's just to have it, even if it's to talk about your plan, even if it's to sort of get a third party review of what you intend to execute yourself. Reach out to Michael or your favored partner within your own ecosystem. With that in mind, I think we'll wrap. So thank you everyone for showing up. Thank you for those who are watching on the recording. Feel free, we've put in the contact details on the slide. Of course, by registering and attending, you're on our mailing list. We have a number of webinars from a number of stakeholders within the ecosystem and the global Jira and Atlassian community. We're really looking forward to bringing you some more support and advice to your journey with Jira and the cloud platforms. I sent the last email to my inbox. If you feel like there's a topic that you want revised to sponsor and cover off, such as this one, or if you feel like you want to do another cloud migration webinar, then just feel free to contact me directly. You've got Vish's details and Michael's details both in the chat, in the previous slide if you need to backtrack. Reach out, say hello, don't be a stranger. We really want to support all of the Jira admins out there in having the life and the day-to-day work that really makes sense for you, so that you're not doing repetitive stuff and that your life's a little bit more sane. And then that's our whole purpose.